Hello everyone, I am back. This is my fourth video. Yes, my fourth video. So, my first video, I read the writings of Greek and Roman authors who described the Egyptians as black. The last two videos I dealt with a rebuttal done by somebody named Matilda, who states that Afrocentric writers are misreading the Greek text. And I'm going to be finishing off my take on this particular rebuttal. So, let's just get into it. The Herodotus quote. Perhaps the most frequently cited Greek quote among Afrocentrics is that of Herodotus, describing Egyptians as well as Colchians of the Caucasus as dark-skinned and woolly-haired. That the Egyptians were dark relative to Greeks is not surprising, considering that the same is true today. But Herodotus' description of Egyptian hair would at first glance appear to conflict with the physical evidence left by the Egyptians themselves. Numerous mummies with hair still attached to the skulls, showing more straight, wavy, or lightly curled hair types than woolly. The only way to make the evidence consistent is to assume Herodotus spoke in a relative rather than an absolute sense. That is, Egyptian hair was on average curlier than Greek hair, and the tightly curled woolly hair type was found more often in Egyptians than in Greeks, as is true today. There was no reason to assume on the basis of Herodotus' words that all or even most Egyptians had woolly hair, nor that such hair found in Egyptians was as woolly as that of tropical Africans. Indeed, Herodotus himself mentions only Ethiopians, not Egyptians, as having the woolliest hair of all men. So, if you recall from that very first video, I quoted Herodotus. My quote was taken from a translation done in 1911 by George Rawlinson. George Rawlinson was white. That translation stated that the Egyptians had black skin and woolly hair. Whatever she got this book from, it says dark skin and woolly hair. It doesn't really matter. It's a small difference. Utilizing the same quote that she, utilizing an earlier quote rather that she provides, I am about the Ethiopians. I'm going to read just the first line. The Ethiopians stain the world and depict a race of men steeped in darkness. The Ethiopians stain the world and depict a race of men steeped in darkness. So the word dark is being applied to the Ethiopian. And again, this is the word quote that she provides. And it's being applied to the Egyptians as well. So dark is being applied to the Egyptian and the Ethiopian. And so the hair of the Egyptians as being woolly. I'm going to read another quote by Aristotle. I read Aristotle in the first video, and I read him in the third video. So I'm going to read this quote by Aristotle as it concerns to the hair of the Egyptians and Ethiopians. Why are the Ethiopians and Egyptians bandy-legged? Is it because the bodies of living creatures become distorted by heat, like logs of wood when they become dry? The condition of the hair too supports this theory. For it is curlier than that of other nations, and curliness is, as it were, crookedness of the hair. So this quote was done by Aristotle. Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great, so roughly 300 years before the birth of Christ. And again, Aristotle is grouping the Egyptians and the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians are actually the Nubians. We're not talking about modern-day Ethiopia, as one singular race. Forgetting the quotes that I provided, let's just look at the quotes she provided. We've already established that the word dark is being applied to the Egyptian and the Ethiopian. And the word woolly is being applied to the Egyptian's hair and Ethiopian's hair. Now, she seems to think that the fact that Herodotus states that the Ethiopians had the woolliest of hair somehow makes all the world of difference in separating the two people. You know, they lived right next to each other. And this was 2,300 years ago, 2,400 years ago, long before Egypt was invaded by a million different people. And whatever measure of woolly hair and dark skin the Egyptians possessed, they got it because they were living next to the woolly hair and the dark skinned Nubians. And I have to stress this enough because, you know, unlike the Egyptians, the Nubians had independent and powerful kingdoms right up until the 13th to the 14th century. So, you know, they didn't suffer as many invasions as Egypt did. So, she goes on to use Greek words. I don't know why she uses the Greek words in some of her explanations, because black people didn't translate any of these books. We didn't look at any of these the original Greek and took liberties in how we wanted to translate it. We had nothing to do with the translation. If a book says black skin and woolly hair, that's because a white guy translated it black skin and woolly hair. We didn't do that. So she should do a seance and try to get in touch with George Rawlinson's spirit and take a beef with him instead of us. So, let's see here. Keeping on going, reading more of what she wrote. Interestingly, Herodotus mentions the Colchians as another group having dark skin and woolly hair. Considering that the Colchians inhabited what is roughly modern-day Georgia in the Caucasus, it would seem that the vast majority of Colchians were most likely and quite literally Caucasian. Of course, Afrocentric diehard might claim that the Colchians too were black Africans, but such a theory runs into trouble when one considers the observations of Hippocrates, who wrote that the Colchians and Phasis are large and corpulent in body. Neither joint nor vein is evident. They have a yellow flesh as if victims of jaundice. Nothing in Hippocrates' description suggests that the Colchians look anything like sub-Saharan Africans, and this further weakens the Afrocentric argument that Egyptians and Colchians must have looked like blacks on the basis of Herodotus' words. So I do find it interesting that she takes Hippocrates at his word as far as how he describes the Colchians, but she doesn't take Herodotus at his word on how he describes the Egyptians and the Colchians. She spends most of the time trying to convince us why dark skin and woolly hair or black skin and woolly hair doesn't actually mean what it sounds like. However, when it comes to Hippocrates, she takes him exactly at his word. And I do find it interesting, Hippocrates doesn't say that they're white. He says they have yellow flesh. So, however, I am going to go to something written in the Chicago Journal. It's called Cushites, Colchians, and Khazars, done by Patrick T. English, Journal of Near Eastern Studies. Long after Herodotus' time, the inhabitants of Colchis seem to have been still of the same physical type as he found there. P.H. Larkert states that St. Jerome and Sophronius, cited by Bocart, called Colchis the second Ethiopia. And Sophronius, in his Life of St. Andrew, informs us that towards the mouth of Asparus, I'm going to butcher these names, by the way, and on the banks of the Phasis, there were Ethiopians. They wrote these words about the 4th century A.D., long after Herodotus. So again, this is in the Chicago Journal, and they mention ancient writers who described the Colchians as being Ethiopians. So I find it interesting that one writer is describing them as being Egyptian, and one writer is describing them as being Ethiopian, the people who lived right next to the Egyptians. And, you know, again, we're talking about the Nubians. We're not talking about people in Ethiopia. Also, yellow flesh. Okay? So we would have some issue with the yellow flesh. If you look up the term high yellow is a term used to describe someone who's biracial. And Google it. You'll see a picture of Beyonce, and it will mention high yellow or simply the term yellow, determining someone who's referring to someone who's biracial and their golden yellow skin. So he's saying they have yellow flesh. It would seem to me that if there's any accuracy in what Hippocrates is saying, then there's still some indication of black heritage amongst these Colchians. and that they might have mixed, or at least the Colchians that he was looking at, might have mixed with white people. Nonetheless, I find it interesting the Colchians are not being described as absolutely being white, even in the quote that she provides. So, that's it. That's it. And, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to be off this subject for a while. Please comment, like, and subscribe. My next video is going to be talking about the other black pharaohs, the Nubians, and reading what the ancient writers had to say about the Nubians. Thank you very much. Have a great day.